Welcome to parts 3 and 4 of The Way Out. I was originally going to make 2 separate videos, but I figured I'd just merge them into one for consistency. Part 3 is in 2 sections, psy-ops and polarization dialectics, and part 4 is on eugenics. And I'll be covering a ton of topics in a short amount of time, so please bear with me. And please bear with my voice right now. It's not the best. It is what it is, and so let's get started. In the last video, we looked at moral relativism as the real original sin, and went over the basics of the occult and the dark occult ideology behind the control system. Now let's go over their tactics. We'll start with a quote from Buckminster Fuller. "The Dark Ages still reign over all humanity, and the depth and persistence of this domination are only now becoming clear. This Dark Ages prison has no steel bars, chains, or locks. Instead, it is locked by misorientation and built of misinformation. Caught up in a plethora of conditioned reflexes and driven by the human ego, both warden and prisoner attempt merely to compete with God. All are intractably skeptical of what they do not understand. We are powerfully imprisoned in these dark ages simply by the terms in which we have been conditioned to think." And he's talking about mind control. And one of the biggest forms of mind control are psy-ops. So what are psy-ops? Psy-ops, psychological operations, is a type of warfare that involves the planned use of propaganda, media, world events, and other psychological means to influence the opinions, emotions, attitudes, and behavior of populations or opposition groups. Such operations are generally intended to demoralize these groups, to break their will to fight or resist, or to manipulate them into favoring a particular ideological or political position. And we'll go over some of these psy-ops, some of these psy-op types. One of the debunking assertions regarding psy-ops is that if such a conspiracy were true, it would require far too many people to be in on it. This is false. Through compartmentalization, a system is structured in such a way that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Thousands of useful dupes could be involved on some level because that's their job and have no idea that they're serving a larger agenda. Only a few people need to know what that agenda is. And that's the pyramidal structure of the control system. Many people are contributing to it and don't even know it. They're just doing their jobs. They're told only what they need to know to do that job. This system wouldn't work otherwise. But at the highest levels, there are occult sorcerers, social engineers, who are ultimately drawing up these plans and calling the shots. They are the true puppet masters. They've been around since the dawn of humanity and have propagated throughout history, mainly through bloodline. They understand everything there is to understand about the human psyche, the ego, our motivations and fears, and they know exactly which strings to pull to manipulate people to get what they want. Large-scale psy-ops are orchestrated by dark occult social engineers, who constitute the so-called ruling class. Members of intelligence agencies, military, and the mainstream media throughout the world follow their orders, and both knowingly and unknowingly carry out these operations. Psy-ops have been conducted upon human beings by this ruling class since the dawn of human history, all over the world. Whenever the rulers of any given geographic area consider it necessary to inject fear or confusion into the consciousness of those they rule, they will orchestrate many different psy-ops to tighten their grip on the people's minds. We have to understand the entire purpose of psychological warfare is to put fear into people's minds. Remember what I said in the first video about the nature of fear? Fear destroys consciousness. It puts us in shutdown mode, and it prevents us from thinking clearly and logically, so that we aren't able to understand what is being done to us. And the occult ruling class are masters of this. They've been at this work for tens of thousands of years. Psy-ops work via the manipulation of human beings through their fear, ignorance, and naivete. If people don't go into a mindset of fear and remain aware and knowledgeable, then we won't fall victim to these operations. But if we remain fearful and ignorant and very naive, then they'll continue to work without failure. Consciousness is always driven by the love-fear polarity. Again, we talked about this in the first video. These are the two ultimate universal forces that are always at work in human consciousness. Fear is the cosmic form of love is the polarity by which consciousness is expanded and improved, and by which knowledge, care, and courage are developed. Many different traditions throughout history have always explained in some form that it's only ever been a struggle between love and fear. Not romantic or familial love, but universal love. Love for truth, for all consciousness, for all sentient beings. Love for what is right. Fear is the polarity which shuts consciousness down and demoralizes and discourages the individual. Many forms of psy-ops prey upon human beings by exploiting their deep-seated fears and their desire to be kept safe. And there's really no such thing as safe in this physical world. You know, we're physical beings, they're physical forces, so there's no such thing as total safety. That's an illusion, and it's preyed upon by the dark occult. Other psy-ops work because of humanity's continued ignorance regarding psychology and basic laws of nature. So we don't know our own psyche, we don't understand our own deep-seated fears, our own motivations, and we don't understand natural law. We don't understand universal principles or universal morality. We don't understand the laws of cause and effect and the laws of consequence. And being in pure ignorance of these things, while we're up against people who understand exactly how all of those things function, what you get is an extreme knowledge differential, and that creates an extreme power differential every time. Psy-ops are dark occultism. As we've already covered, occultism is a body of knowledge that isn't widely known to the general population, consisting of knowledge about the human psyche and the laws of nature. It can be used for either good, the uplift of human consciousness, or evil, manipulation, control, enslavement. And what psy-ops are doing is using the knowledge of the occult about human psychology and spirituality, and has been hidden to create a power differential between the ruling class and everyone else. If people are not educated as to human psychology and spirituality, they won't realize what's happening to them. That is literally how easy it is for these dark occult sorcerers to continue to get away with manipulating people. Now, we tend to think, because of Hollywood imagery, that Satanists or dark occultists are like Voldemort, or some black-cloaked wizard or hooded cultist out in the woods sacrificing goats, and nothing could be further from the truth. You're more likely to find them in a CEO office or a prestigious university, or the highest levels of a banking institution or medical institution. And you'll especially find them in intelligence agencies. That's where they're largely concentrated and run the psy-ops from. They look like a respectable businessman or woman dressed in a tailored suit, more than anything from a horror movie. So dark occultists should be perceived as highly adept psychologists who hold and wield this knowledge in order to manipulate and exploit the ignorant and fearful. A power differential is created, and this small minority who are in the know wish to permanently enslave humanity and effectively become God on earth. But that's their end goal. Here are some of the types of psy-ops that go on. You have high-profile assassinations, which are meant to demoralize people. The JFK assassination is a huge one. False flag terrorism, or school shootings. Creating cult mindsets around false information. Stand-down psy-ops like QAnon, aka Trust the Plan. And identity politics and social movements like wokeism. So those are just a few examples. Real quick, I want to talk about cult techniques, because this is a huge part of creating and maintaining effective psyops. When we think of the term cult, we usually think of groups like Heaven's Gate, the Manson family, or the more recent NXIVM. Those are types of cults we're familiar with. We don't broaden our understanding of what a cult actually is conceptually. Ultimately, cults are based in groupthink, no individuality, collective identity, and have an us versus them worldview, making them dangerous to the rights and well-being of anyone who isn't in the cult. So, based on that description, what else can we consider a cult? Organized religions, politics, the police and military. In some form or fashion, and to varying degrees, they all use these techniques. These 4 techniques have been used unwaveringly by cults of all kinds for millennia. They have always worked because people have not come to a high enough point in their consciousness to understand how they work. So let's go over each one. Isolation. Keeping their members secluded from the rest of society, or the rest of the world. In politics, that would be nationalism. Indoctrination. Constantly repeating some dogmatic idea or belief, or its repetition through behavior and ritual. Conformity. The old identity has to be broken down so they can accept their new normal, their new life, with their new family. And this often requires conformity in appearance, like national colors or uniforms. The word uniform means one form, so no individuality in thought or expression. And then trauma, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional abuse, it's all about maintaining an atmosphere of fear. Fear of punishment for doing anything different, for doing the right thing instead of obeying, or any attempts to leave the cult. You're a traitor, an apostate, a heretic, and so on. And they have names for those who aren't in their cult at all, like undesirables, degenerates, civilian pukes, non-believers, and so on. So aside from these more obvious cults, what recent psyop did we go through that created this kind of thinking and behavior in society? The COVID-19 pandemic. Well, how were those techniques used here? Isolation, stay-at-home orders, lockdowns. Stay glued to your TVs and your TikTok feed so you can be fed the lies. The indoctrination, non-stop adverts and fear-mongering. Trust the science, stay 6 feet apart. Use hand sanitizer. Conformity. This one should be obvious. Wear a mask. This is your new normal. Even Fauci himself said, do as you're told. Get your vaccines like a good little slave, and we'll even give you a free donut if you do. And then trauma, just endless fear, fear, fear. Fear of some invisible monster called a virus, or fear of each other. And what does trauma and fear do to the body? It causes stress. And what does constant stress do? It makes you sick. The body's defenses are lowered, so all kinds of toxicity can get in easier. And then the body tries to purge it, and that's why we get sick. It's a detox process. Virology and contagion is bunk. It is an illusion that has been played against us to make us afraid. Again, whether it's fear of nature, fear of each other, or even fear of our own bodies. And then asking for government to solve the problem they created. And as someone who studies the occult, One thing I noticed was the specific use of color in all the COVID adverts and PSAs. All of these images are from different sources. So do you see the similarity? It's the constant use of blue and yellow. All different types of organizations in different places using the same color scheme. Why is that? Well, they're told to, but there has to be a reason, right? A psychological reason, like why fast food restaurants use red and orange a lot. Those colors relate to the root and sacral chakras, the carnal level, comfort, passion, desire, hunger. So there has to be a reason for this too. And there is. Coincidence? If you understand how these people operate, you know better than to think that. The Ukraine war was the next big psy-op after COVID started dying down, and they needed to mentally and emotionally condition us for it, so that we'd support the war, and especially the Ukrainian government. Nothing these psychopaths do is coincidental, and because we don't understand the occult and don't have symbol literacy or correlational thinking skills as a society, they'll keep using the same techniques over and over. As arrogant as they are predictable if you know what to look for. But the COVID psyop and the war are just two of the many ways they try to maintain this psyop, the belief in authority. Not the kind of authority where you're deferring to someone else's expertise, but the kind that expects unquestioning obedience to a master or a master class. That's what the so-called elites think they are, our owners, our masters, and that we have a moral duty to obey them. But they don't use those terms. They euphemize everything. So this psyop has been around since the beginning. It's a worldview psyop to get us to believe that a command obedience structure in society is morally legitimate and necessary, and that without it there would just be chaos. But its true purpose is about convincing us that some people have the right to rule. That belief is necessary to keep us enslaved. And we're going to focus on this one for a bit. The belief in authority is an illusion of a broken psyche, based entirely in violence, and built upon the erroneous and dogmatic belief that some people are masters who have the moral right to issue commands, while others are slaves who have a moral obligation to obey the masters. So the belief in authority is a belief in slavery. And you might think, hey, I don't believe in slavery. Most of us don't believe in the kind of slavery carried out in colonial times. Most of us have rejected that, and that's a good thing, of course. We just haven't figured out that there is still one form of slavery that we keep supporting: government. The belief in the legitimacy of authority and government, whether one realizes it or not, is the belief in the legitimacy of slavery, period. You can't have freedom and government at the same time, just like you cannot be a freeman and a slave at the same time. Government is slavery. Many people immediately want to assume that I'm talking about chattel slavery, like in colonial era plantations. But that's only one form of slavery. There are many others. And here's what slavery as a whole actually is, regardless of type. Slavery is a claim of ownership on your person, the product of your labor or your possessions, in whole or in part. All natural rights are property rights. Understanding this is fundamental to understanding the condition of slavery. We all own ourselves, and we have the right to live freely and exercise our natural rights, provided actions we perform do not infringe upon the rights of others. Anyone who dares to try to stop people from living within these natural rights is making a direct claim of ownership upon others, which is the very definition of slavery. Those who do this or condone this are tyrants and should be treated as such. And here's a quote from Lysander Spooner. It says, "If any man's money can be taken by a so-called government without his own personal consent, all his other rights are taken with it. For with his money, the government can and will hire soldiers to stand over him, compel him to submit to its arbitrary will, and kill him if he resists. And these are the enforcers of slavery today, the police and military. They work only for the interests and dictates of the ruling class. And part of our great work is to get these people to quit their cult, because that's what they are, cults, satanic cults. And it's also to get the people who condone these cults to stop condoning them. Police and military are like the house slaves of the Civil War period. On plantations, there were slaves that threatened the other slaves who were non-compliant. They were willing to put their own people under duress for the extra food or a warmer blanket. Instead of trying to do something to end that condition for everyone, they sided with their master. And this is what the modern police forces and military are, everywhere, not just America. They are slaves themselves conducting slavery upon other slaves. They are the people who are keeping the system of slavery in place by keeping us in a constant state of duress. And part of the problem of why we don't see our situation as slavery is that people don't understand what the condition of duress is and why it's immoral. Nor do they understand that they have every right to end it. By whatever means they choose, they have that right. Now, I'm not suggesting to go out there and engage in violence. I'm only saying you have the right to end this state of duress. To do the right thing is not always the safe thing to do. That's why education is so important, to reach out to these people and their loved ones to help them realize what they're doing and quit their cults. We want to avoid conflict and bloodshed as much as possible. But we also have to be prepared to defend ourselves from tyrants. So let's go over what duress actually is. Duress is a continuous condition of coercion of the free will of a being or group of beings by another being or group of beings through threats of violence and or actual acts of violence if those being coerced do not comply with the decrees or commands they are given. That is what duress is. It's someone telling you, you will comply with my commands, or I'll threaten you with violence if you don't comply. When people are held in the condition of duress, they are unlawfully prevented from exercising their free will to engage in rights which they actually possess, and or they are coerced through threats of violence to perform behaviors against their free will. Meaning if they don't do something, violence will be conducted upon them. Or if they do something they were told not to do, violence will be conducted upon them, even if that behavior is one of their rights. That is what duress is, and every one of us is living in the condition of duress, whether we realize it or not. And there is no one on this planet that has the right to hold anyone in the condition of duress. Every person held under duress has the right to end that condition immediately, by whatever means necessary. That is our natural law right. And people will see those who put other people in duress as common thugs or mafia goons, but not government agents. They separate the street thugs from the people who are saying, you can't exercise this right without my approval. And if we find you doing this particular behavior that we told you you can't do, we're going to cage you or shoot you. Well, guess what? There's no difference, because if you believe certain people have rights that others don't, you don't understand truth, you don't understand morality, and you don't understand natural law. So what is the difference between a police officer and a strong-arm mafia enforcer? Nothing. There is no difference between them. They are both common criminals. They are both members of gangs or cults who do not question orders or think for themselves. They both initiate violence to enforce policy. Both have a code of secrecy, lack of transparency, and both cite the institution's policies for the violence that they manifest in reality. They are ultimately responsible for their behaviors. Yet they want to somehow abdicate themselves of that responsibility by saying, well, the politicians ordered me to do it, or my captain ordered me to do it, or the president ordered me to do it. It doesn't matter who told you to do something that's wrong. If you did it, you're responsible for the harm. Even those who don't go out and do the violence, who sit behind a desk all day, they are just as morally culpable because they're condoning it. So both are complicit gang members. They are order followers. The order follower always bears more moral culpability than the order giver, because the order follower is the one who actually performed the action, and in taking such action, actually brought the resultant harm into physical manifestation. Order following is the pathway to every form of evil and chaos in our world. It should never be seen as a virtue by anyone who considers themselves a moral human being. Order followers have ultimately been personally responsible and morally culpable for every form of slavery and every single totalitarian regime that has ever existed. The order follower always bears more moral culpability than the order giver. Such an excuse, if I was just doing my job or just following orders, should never be accepted by anyone with conscience. This is the mental illness that is the belief in authority. It is the number one belief that keeps us in duress and keeps us enslaved. It is the number one belief that perpetuates all evil. If we want to end evil, we have to abandon it completely. Now let's move on to some other psy-ops. Here's one of the big psy-ops that came along in the early 2000s. And it's quite sad that some people actually believe that Hitler was really a good guy. This is a disinfo psy-op. The public sell is largely done through books and documentaries that are complete fabrications of history, but I see it promulgated through social media all the time. I'm not saying that there aren't mistakes or even deliberate disinformation injected into history regarding this time period. But the whole point is they want to sell people on this notion to such an extent that they end up taking the side of the Nazis. It not only makes them look ridiculous, it makes the freedom movement in general look bad. So the true purpose of this psy-op is to get people to believe in revisionist history, to side with psychopaths, and to associate the freedom movement with racism, Nazism, and white supremacy. That way they can paint us as total extremists who believe that Hitler and the Nazis were the good guys, and associate this with people who are simply advocating for freedom. And many people in the freedom movement are falling for this psy-op. It's a shame. And of course, we have the QAnon psy-op. This is a disinfo, stand-down psy-op. The sell is that a group of anonymous white hats are working within US politics, intelligence, and military to reform America and bring elite globalists to justice. And that is what Q followers believe, that a group of anonymous agents are working inside government, and that these white hats have our interests in mind, and they're going to arrest all the bad guys, and all our problems will be solved. And there was another psy-op like this that went on during the Bolshevik Revolution. It was called Operation Trust. People believed this group was going to save the day, that the matter was in hand, and they didn't have to take any action against the Bolsheviks because others were working on that from inside Russia, and that matter would be resolved. Well, how did that work out? Not so well. So social engineers are bringing that same psy-op back out today. Instead of Operation Trust, it's Trust the Plan. Kind of like trust the science, right? Just trust us. We have your interests in mind. It's all being taken care of. No action is required on your part. Stand down. So the true purpose is to make those who are opposed to globalism and totalitarianism stand down from real-world action because they believe Q have the battle in hand. To associate anyone gravitating to this belief with the freedom movement in order to associate it with those who are gullible, wishful thinkers, and even paint them as extremists. The people who believe this are pretty out there in their mindset and what they believe to be true regarding reality. It's sad. And what's actually happening here is they're preying on religious feelings in people. The same with Flat Earth. The same with the New Age movement. People want to gravitate to a religious belief system, and the sorcerers of our world are giving them religions. They just invent new religions and paint people with false hope and false ideas and get them to create division and sow seeds of discord. That's all they do because they're sorcerers and they know how to manipulate. They're getting the job done. So speaking of false religion, let's look at the New Age movement for a bit. It began in the early 20th century and is still active today. It is a worldview, disinfo, and stand-down psy-op. The public sell is that it is a new system of spiritual beliefs and practices for people looking for alternatives to traditional religion. But the true purpose is that it's just another spiritual trap to prevent true awakening, spreading false teachings with some truth sprinkled in to make it more appealing. It emphasizes thought and emotion only, leaving right action at the door. So no action, just thought and emotion, no masculine principle. The New Age movement is destroying the sacred masculine principle of right action. Let's look at some specific New Age deceptions. Number 1, ignore the negative. One of the biggest deceptions is the notion that we give power to something negative or harmful simply by paying attention to it and becoming aware of its existence. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Oh, that stuff upsets me and scares me. I don't want to look at that or talk about that. Look, ignoring the negative is never positive. It's disempowering. It doesn't matter how it makes us feel. And what this deception is emotional mind control. So let's correct this. Seeing the negative for what it is creates the ability to steel ourselves against its harmful effects and possibly to avert those effects entirely. Refusing to look at something because it makes you feel uncomfortable or scared is willfully choosing to be ignorant and therefore unconscious. So we need to feel those things, like guilt. Guilt is a valid emotion. We need to feel it so it might give us a kick in the butt to start doing the right thing and being part of the solution, to start doing our moral duty. Deception number 2. Anger is bad. You know, it needs to be purged or buried deep down inside and never felt. This is a huge deception, to believe that anger somehow means you're not enlightened or not awake or mature. Anger is just a tool. Just like with occult knowledge, it can be used for good or bad. When it's channeled properly, it motivates us to take right action. You don't want to dwell in it or be constantly angry at trivial nonsense, but anger itself is a gift. Same with the ego, it's a tool. But when it's out of control and is taken over your mind, it leads to harm. So anger is not something we need to suppress or purge. In fact, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Non-righteous anger is counterproductive to personal development and positive change, but righteous indignation, when channeled productively, can be a major motivation to create positive change in the world. And you don't want to dwell on that either. It needs to be channeled productively. And I recommend watching the movie Network for a good example of righteous anger. Number 3, we're all one, so it's all good. Nothing bad is taking place. It's all good, man. Just chill. It's all going to work out. We're right where we need to be. And this is part of the New Age belief that right and wrong are just arbitrary judgments we make, not real or objective. So they're invalid. Oh, those are just negative judgments. It's all just an experience. Right and wrong aren't real. There's no actual good or evil. They're just human terms. Nonsense. And this notion that everything is allowed, it's all good, boils down to one thing: moral relativism. This is the mindset that is destroying humanity. When you think right and wrong are just preferences that we can determine on a whim, we're headed straight for the cage. And this is where we are because we've bought into this crap. There is an objective moral law inherent in nature. We cannot make up right and wrong for ourselves. There is no justification for murder, assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, or deception, regardless of what greater good someone claims. The ends do not justify the means, and the means are immoral. Number 4, the idea that the truth can never be really known. And in Satanism, they have their own version of sin. They have 9 specific sins. And the first one on the list is stupidity. That means Satanists don't want to engage in stupid thought. They do want to know the truth, but they want to hold it back or occult it from everyone else. And solipsism is also one of their sins. This is the notion that you can never really know anything. In other words, nobody can have any real knowledge. It's just me and my perceptions and your perceptions, and all of our perceptions are valid. Your opinion based on blind belief is as valid as someone else's decades of research. And that's horseshit. There is such a thing as truth and knowledge, and they can be known. Yet so many people have bought into this. If there's no such thing as truth, then there can't be such a thing as right and wrong. Therefore, morality is all nonsense, and what you get is a society based in chaos and slavery. So the dark occult propagates this, ultimately to dissuade people from trying to find out what's right, in order to lull the spirit from actually fighting for what's right. And that very essence, the spirit to fight for what's right, has been the sole enemy of all tyranny. Who's going to risk their lives to fight for something they're not even sure about? So in other words, those who don't know won't say no. If you don't know your rights, you won't fight for them. So here's the correction to this. Perception is not reality. Objective reality does exist. Truth can be known. Human rights are inherent to creation and are based in truth and natural law. There is no truth, then there are no rights, no morality, no sovereignty, and no freedom. Number 5. It's all just an illusion or a simulation. We don't have to worry about what happens here. All that matters is the spiritual world. The physical world and the spiritual world are the same thing. Okay? But this is what religions teach. They want people to give up and stand down from creating real change and manifesting goodness here in the material domain. You have to be here right now. We're here for a reason, not to be changed by the world, but to change the world. So this concept that it's all an illusion is basically saying, since nothing is truly real, nothing matters. Don't worry about that whole slavery thing or about children being trafficked by dark occultists or psychos ruling the world. None of that matters. And that's bullshit. What happens in the physical world does matter, whether or not it's holographic or some computer simulation. The experience is real. This is how this whole of consciousness learns and grows and understands what it is. Is reality holographic? Yeah. Is everything one? At the spiritual level, yeah. We're all part of consciousness. We're all part of the all as individuated monads. But understanding that doesn't mean the experience that happens inside this realm isn't real. It is. And if it's a bad, negative experience, it's still real. So yes, reality is holographic, but the experience is real. What we do here does matter. There are laws in effect that determine the consequences of our actions. No amount of disbelief in these laws can ever change them or the effects we receive from our actions. And there's many more New Age deceptions or psy-ops, but I wanted to cover just those few. The New Age basically is the catch-all net for those who don't want conventional religion, but it's all nonsense with just enough truth sprinkled on top to reel you in. And religion as a whole is the father of all psy-ops. Just like the belief in authority, it's been around since the beginning. Conventional religion, in particular, wants us to believe God and spirituality are what they say they are, and if you don't accept it, then you're damned to hell. And the true purpose is to give humanity a distorted view of these things, to lead us away from truth, and keep us fighting each other. That makes us much more easily ruled and controlled. The word religion derives from Latin, from the Latin verb religare, meaning to tie back, to hold back, to bind, or to thwart from forward progress. So a false religion is a system of control, based in unchallenged dogmatic belief, which holds back the progress of consciousness. So whether it's cultural religion or any other belief system, addictions are a religion, politics, social movements, ego attachments, bad habits. If it's holding us back in consciousness, it's a false religion. Government is a false religion. It's a cult, a mind control cult. As Larkin Rose puts it, it's the most dangerous superstition in the world. Government, from the Latin verb gubernare, meaning to control, in the Latin noun mens mentis, meaning mind. So the word means mind control. Now the suffix ment means the state of or condition of something in modern English, but there's a reason for that. Nothing in the material domain exists without first happening in the mind. We imagine something or think of what we want to do, and then we create it or do it. So yes, government does mean mind control. By influencing our thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs, we then manifest that outcome in the world, the outcome they want. So here are some other psy-ops I didn't really cover. The JFK assassination, the 9/11 Trade Center attacks, the whole weapons of mass destruction situation, school shootings, fluoride is good for you, the flat earth movement, the attempted Trump assassination, the UFO disclosure embargo, and the demonization of the occult. Now, some people think the no virus, no contagion movement is a psy-op, and maybe it is, but from personal experience, being around sick people has never made me sick. Virology suggests that healthy bodies can suddenly become diseased by invading agents or germs, but from my experience, it has always come down to toxicity, like bad foods or bad air conditions, and elevated stress levels. High states of fear create immense stress, and that causes the body's defenses to lower. And then toxicity gets in faster, and then we purge it. But that's a topic for another time. Regarding the last point on the previous list is the fear of the occult. One of the biggest and most damaging psy-ops is the fear or dismissal of anything under the term occult. Due to deliberate obfuscation and naysaying, most people tend to assume anything considered occult is either evil, superstitious nonsense, or contains nothing of value. And this holds people back from discovering this knowledge, while simultaneously holding very strong opinions about it, despite their own willful ignorance of it. So ask yourself the question, who benefits from human beings being ignorant of this knowledge? And whether or not you want to incorporate it into your own life as a personal spiritual practice is still vitally important that you study and understand it fully. If we don't know what the social engineers and sorcerers of this world know, then we can never understand the methods, language, and symbolism they use against us on a daily basis, nor recognize their patterns. I would also suggest we have a false awakening psy-op. I've heard many people in the freedom movement saying there's awakening going on. I really wish I could agree. Being awake doesn't just mean you can see that there is an agenda. Anyone can see that. Most people, though, are still moral relativists who continue to believe in and condone the legitimacy of government and authority, and fall for psy-op after psy-op. Most are still very ensconced in the me ego mindset. Most still do not understand the actual causal factors of our current condition, or that the solution is rooted in consciousness and spiritual understanding, not external factors like money and politics. Most continue their willful ignorance of occult knowledge. It can seem like there is a growing awakening happening when your social strata is limited to the like-minded. That tiny percentage of the population can seem like a lot of people, but in comparison to the aggregate, it's still minuscule. It's good to see, but it's still not a true awakening. People are simply feeling the brunt of tyranny in more personal ways, becoming slightly more aware of it. There's still more to learn, and there's still a ton of internal work to be done, which a lot of people don't want to do. If you're not free within your own mind, heart, and soul, you can't expect to create freedom externally. True awakening is a deeply internal, deeply spiritual moment. It is an immense shift in consciousness, where all of our false beliefs and ego traps are dissolved and abandoned. It's about coming to understand who you are as a spirit in the flesh being. It's about understanding that the current human condition is slavery, and the only way out is through deeply understanding and abiding by true conscience and natural law. It's about developing care, courage, conviction, and conscience, and taking right action. And is that what we're seeing in the world? No. Perhaps a very, very tiny sliver of humanity has truly awakened, but beyond that, the bulk of humanity is still very much in an ego-hardened, willfully ignorant trance. The dark occultists aren't nervous or panicking right now. They see our truth and freedom movement as a joke. A true awakening won't be something only a few people notice. It will be obvious to the whole planet, because it will shake things up in ways that will devastate the control system worldwide. That's not happening today. Tyranny is growing. Abject slavery is at our doorstep. We still have time to turn it around, but that requires knowledge, care, conscience, willpower, and sacrifice. It requires shadow work and abandoning false belief systems. It requires taking personal responsibility and right action to speak the truth fearlessly, persistently, and unapologetically. We make an awakening happen. The critical mass has to be achieved. For each individual who becomes awake through our efforts and service to truth, the whole awakens a bit more. If we don't do our part, evil will win. So don't do the psy-hop. There are psy-ops for every level of consciousness. Social engineers have already mapped out the entire human mind and designed programs for every psychological profile. You might think you're waking up, but you're actually just hopping from one box to the next along the spectrum, psy-op to psy-op. So it kind of works this way, where we go from statism, from government is good and necessary and we trust the government, to, well, we really need limited government, or we need a constitutional republic. But you're getting closer to truth, but it's still just another cul-de-sac to trap you. And then we might go further down the conspiracy rabbit hole, You're now at that middle ground where clearly things are wrong, but don't worry, we've got this insider information coming in, and we don't have to do anything because the white hats are going to fix it all. And then when QAnon isn't working, we go full-on conspiracy theory. But it's just another limited box. It's closer to truth. There's a lot of truth in it, but it's not a real solution. It's not actually going to create any change. And that's the point of a psy-op, to give you a little taste of truth, but doesn't actually fix the problem. It's just, look at all this stuff I know, open your eyes, sheeple, and then continue to do nothing. And then, of course, you latch on to the flat earth stuff. You've gone from being a trust the government status to a flat earther. You know, you go from a point where you're like, government's totally evil, which is good, but then you're being diverted from a path that actually leads to true solutions. So let's say we find out definitively that the earth is flat. Then what? How does that knowledge help us end slavery? It doesn't. It's just another belief system, another religion. Now, I'm not saying it isn't important to know, but it's not what we need to be focusing on right now. So don't do the psy-hop. And we've all done it to some degree. You know, while these are psy-ops and control cul-de-sacs, they're also stepping stones towards truth. So it's important to learn and find out what's going on, but don't get stuck in these boxes. Keep moving forward and do the right thing. Knowledge is useless without right action. So that's the basic gist of psy-ops. In section 2, we're going to look at one of the biggest forms of mind control, which is the use of polarization dialectics. So let's go over that. But first, let's define the word dialectic. The word dialectic is derived from the Greek preposition dia, meaning through or by way of, and the Latin noun lectus, meaning choice. So a false dialectic is when you are given two choices, both of which lead to the same outcome. And the most obvious example of this is the political system of left wing and right wing. Whichever one you choose, they both lead to slavery. So government and religion are false dialectic. Do you want to believe in materialistic, scientistic Darwinism, where the so-called fittest get to rule? Or do you want to believe in whatever the salvationist nonsense of the day is? Because they're both just a choice that gets you to the same place, control. Government works through the left brain and binds the right brain. This causes an imbalance in the mind. Left brain imbalance can create psychopathic tendencies, such as leading some to the belief that they have a right to rule over others through violence. Religion works through the right brain and binds the left brain. And right brain imbalance creates blind acceptance and collectivist groupthink, leading to a condition in which willing followers will readily submit to authority. So what happens when we have both of these things operating in people's minds? You have a whole mind in chains. And when you put together a whole bunch of these, a bunch of minds in chains, what do you get? A prison planet. A whole world in chains. As above, so below. As below, so above. This is the law of correspondence. If you want to get the world out of bondage, you first have to get your own mind and heart out of bondage. All false belief systems have to be abandoned, not just the ones we don't like. And once a dialectic is created, only one side needs to fall for it. Only one side needs to buy into the manipulation in order for this strategy to be successful. Here's another example. The dialectic in neo-feminism is largely between people who believe in a patriarchy and people who believe we need a matriarchy. What do these words have in common? Archy, which means rulership, control over other people, or in other words, slavery. It comes from the Greek word archon, which means master over slave or ruler. And there is no patriarchy, by the way. What we have is an occultocracy. And it's not exclusively male. There are psychopathic women in the dark occult too. I recommend looking into Michael Tessarian's work on this topic. The other commonality here is the control system itself. It doesn't matter who is sitting on that throne. What matters is that we believe there is a throne to be sat upon, and there isn't. The concept of authority needs to go in our society. Wars are another false dialectic manipulation. Let's say you understand that's what war is, that you realize it's a divide and conquer strategy, and that those involved are falling for it and performing violence on other people. Don't you think a choice has to be made to try to stop it? Or do we just let their actions go on unchecked? Same with the police state in America. You might say the police are just under mind control. They think what they're doing is right, that they're just doing their jobs. Yeah, that's true, but does that mean you just let them continue to violate your rights because they don't know any better? The concept to keep in mind here that both sides don't have to fall for the manipulation. Only one side of the dialectic needs to fall for it. One side believes in their minds that they have an enemy, and they're already waging war on that enemy. So once one side buys into the dialectic, the other side has a choice to make. They either have to convince the other side that they're under complete mind control and that they have to be willing to listen to reason and change their behavior, or there has to be a conflict. And whether we've bought into it or not, it doesn't excuse the behavior or mean that no action should be taken regarding it. A choice has to be made to either help those people come to their senses or to stop the wrong behavior. We never seem to do either. We just look at our screens and complain. And that solves nothing. If you recognize a false dialectic that's creating conflict, don't play into it or act like you have no responsibility to try to stop it. Ignoring or dismissing the negative doesn't make it go away. We have to either try to educate people to the wrong they're doing so they might stop, or we have to stop putting up with it. And if we don't do the right thing in courage, the wrong thing will only continue and probably get worse. And speaking of war, that's how the gender war is being played off. We're going to focus on this one for the majority of the presentation going forward. There is no bigger dialectical divide than men versus women. It is the only division in humanity that is split exactly 50-50. So it's not political because there's more than two parties. And the same with race or religion. But with gender, it's split down the middle. The social engineers have specifically focused their efforts on cultivating this gender war because through it, they can create maximum societal tension, instability, and chaos. Because the fabric of society is the familial bond between man and woman. That's why they're trying to wage this war, to create maximum divide, maximum tension, instability, and chaos. And people are falling for it. Very few are recognizing it for what it is and rejecting it. One side, especially, has fallen for it, which is women. Not all, but, enough. And the reaction from men isn't one of reason and sense. It's resentment and hate. So it started defensively, but turned into outright war. And on top of that, there's also a war going on against both genders equally. The war on testosterone. A biological war on testosterone is being waged on both men and women by the social engineers. Testosterone is a vital hormone for the physiological and psychological health of both men and women. It could be seen as the will hormone or the drive hormone. Low testosterone levels in either gender ultimately destroys vitality and normal human sex drive, and acts as a means of population control and eugenics. Women also require testosterone. although in smaller amounts than men. If lacking in this hormone, women become over-feminized, depressed, weaker in overall strength and vitality, and their sex drive is usually completely destroyed. Those symptoms of low testosterone in women are loss of muscle mass, low libido, hair loss and thinning, fatigue, depression, low self-esteem, memory lapses, anxiety, abnormal blood issues like anemia, loss of motivation, fat accumulation, and so on. One of the things that keeps testosterone levels normalized is a healthy libido. It's a cycle. One thing drives the other. Across the board, modern medical doctors have seen a disturbing trend of testosterone levels plummeting significantly for both genders. Instead of alerting people to this fact and trying to understand why this is happening, they have been deliberately reducing the levels of testosterone that are considered normal for both genders in medical testing and literature. And this happened in a big way with the trans movement. Destruction of the familial dynamic. It's what this gender war in all of its forms is all leading to. The attack upon the natural sexual familial dynamic tremendously destabilizes the ability for people to establish firm foundations in relationships, morality, health, and real education. Entire industries thrive on this social disease. True moral values can be devastated through the destroyed familial dynamic due to the lack of proper parenting. Children raised with little to no moral values eventually have a different value system grafted upon them by schooling, mainstream media, popular entertainment, and their peers, who have often gone through a similar process of moral degradation. And then money eventually becomes the only value system. So instead of asking someone on a date, "Are you a good person?" or "What are your principles?" we end up asking, "What do you do for a living?" It's putting more value on materialism, statism, and ego identity over morality and authenticity. When we see this with things like hypergamy and the princess programming, where girls are being programmed to seek out someone with lots of money who can take care of them financially, rather than seeking genuine connection and partnership. And when the marriage doesn't work out, who do they look to provide for them and take care of their children? The state. It's also about breeding out the rebels in society. Rebellion against the state, a reverence for true freedom, and placing high value on personal responsibility and individual rights are traits that are being deliberately bred out of humanity through an epi-eugenics agenda, because such traits are undesirable to the ruling class. Socially engineered traits being bred into the new human include a fear of going against the norm, docility, submissiveness, obedience to authority, and going along to get along. And I'll go more into what the epi-eugenics agenda is in the next section. A huge element of this agenda is woke ideology. Social justice movements always appear noble on the surface, and people who claim to be woke may even have good intentions. The problem is that these kinds of social movements almost always have an insidious origin. Woke ideology isn't something that a bunch of well-meaning people gravitated to through any evolutions in thought. Obsessions with sexual, racial, and gender identity over philosophical and moral values did not manifest organically. It is the result of decades of deliberate social engineering, which has its roots in Marxism and Satanism. The woke doesn't mean tolerant, it doesn't mean inclusive, it doesn't mean progressive, evolved, or awake. It is not love. It is violence and division masquerading as love. And you'll notice that the majority of those who call themselves woke are radically left-leaning statists or pseudo-anarchists who would still follow the dictates and mandates of the state if the politician they like is in charge. The same mindset can be applied to right-leaning statists too, who call themselves red-pilled. Same mindset, different cults. One of the biggest institutions behind a lot of this is the Tavistock Institute. Groups like that drip-feed society belief systems and ideologies so adeptly that they can convince people that certain ideas, beliefs, feelings, likes, and dislikes are their own. You'll notice that those who buy into them are very immature, mentally and emotionally. And what group of people are the easiest to program? Children, particularly in their formative years. Well, when you keep a society in the mindset of a child, you can get them to believe anything, and even to defend those beliefs violently. Sadly, that's the mindset I see all over the place. We don't think rationally most of the time. We think with our emotions. We react before we consider what the truth might be. So when ideologies like this use terms like diversity and equality, but people's behaviors don't align with that, we demonize those terms. The use of the terms diversity, inclusion, and equality within the woke ideology are ultimately to turn people against these ideas by associating them with wrong thinking and worldview violence. And I'm seeing that play out. The word diversity in this context isn't about celebrating our differences as a species. It's about getting us to obsess over those differences and making sure we aren't uniting in common cause against any real threat, like government. This catalyzes more tension and conflict between race, gender, and culture. Equality and inclusion sound positive and can be positive things, but in woke ideology, it ultimately leads us to embrace the worst aspects of society, like child abuse and perversion, and then people are called bigots for speaking against these things. So neither side of the dialectic is expressing any kind of reason, respect, or tolerance. And there is a positive form of tolerance. True tolerance is understanding individual sovereignty and rights, and leaving people alone to exercise those rights without restraint, restriction, or duress. True equality is being equal in those rights under natural law. The woke ideology doesn't teach this. It is divisive, dogmatic, and arrogant. It is base-level consciousness, devoid of any spirituality. It's out of control, me thinking. Here's a quote from Dr. John Coleman's book, The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, the shaping the moral, spiritual, cultural, political, and economic decline of the USA. It says, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men that we have never heard of. Whatever attitude one chooses to take towards this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. So of course this is going on worldwide, not just America. And wokeness absolutely is a polarization dialectic. Many outspoken critics of wokeness are in a similar mindset themselves. They don't have the knowledge or consciousness of where the ideology actually comes from. They focus their criticisms and attacks on the victims of this mind virus, and this is the idea. This creates more division, more confusion, and more conflict so that we never recognize the real threat or unify in common cause against it. Both sides of the dialectic end up resorting to immoral behavior. So they think the left wing made it all up, that the entire ideology is a product of leftist political activism. Leftism is simply a vehicle for it, just as right-wing politics is a vehicle for racial or cultural nationalism. Both lead to the same thing, slavery. But here's the truth of the matter. Those of us who criticize wokeness rationally are not anti-diversity or white supremacists or other such nonsense. We see what the agenda is, and it has nothing to do with love, acceptance, or equality. Those who champion it largely don't understand what those concepts truly are. They use those terms, but then they proceed to engage in violence, which can include forced association, grooming of minors, doxing, cancel culture, property damage, and even assault. In their minds, this is righteous behavior. They genuinely believe they're morally justified, and this needs to be healed, not attacked. Again, the woke agenda ultimately stems from Satanism, and everything that Satanism does is to invert the natural. They want us in these mindsets of egotism, moral relativism, and social Darwinism. They want all of us obsessing over race, sexuality, gender, and other ego identities. They want us in the I am my mindset. The last thing they want for us is to recognize within ourselves and in others our rights, our sovereignty, and our spiritual interconnectedness. And all of it culminates into the creation of what the dark occult calls the new man, or the new human, completely devoid of spirit, reason, morality, principle, or autonomy, stripped of the sacred masculine or sacred feminine. Just an automaton who will never resist, only obey. The perfect slave. Here's a quote from Jim Keith from his book, Mass Control, Engineering Human Consciousness. If you haven't read this, find it and read it. He says, "Here stands the new man. His conception of reality is a dance of electronic images fired into his forebrain, a gossamer construction of his masters, designed so that he will not, under any circumstances, perceive the actual. This new man's happiness is delivered to him through a tube or an electronic connection. His God lurks behind an electronic curtain, and when the curtain is pulled away, we find the CIA sorcerer, the media manipulator." But the manipulation isn't just through media programming and psy-ops. This is also a eugenics agenda. So the woke agenda isn't just about social division. There's another more insidious aspect to it. Before we examine that, we need to understand the underlying reason of why it works. The neo-feminism agenda, wokeism, and the gender war is, at its core, a form of eugenics. And we talked about this in part 2 when we were going over the 4 tenets of Satanism. The word eugenics is derived from the Greek adjective eugenes, meaning well-born, which is in turn derived from the Greek adjective eu, meaning good, and the Greek noun genos, meaning race or stock. Eugenics is a social ideology advocating the promotion of higher rates of sexual reproduction for people with traits and characteristics desired by its proponents, and sterilization and reduced rates of sexual reproduction for those with undesired traits and characteristics. This practice could be described as a main religious tenet of the ruling class, who believe that it is simply the natural order for the most ruthless of humans, whose genes are the fittest, to rule the rest of the human herd. They see themselves as an elite class of human beings who attained the highest positions of power in the world because they are genetically superior to those they rule. Ultimately, this psychopathic ruling class believe that they have every right to decide who is allowed to live and procreate and who must die. And we've seen it propagated in the past through wars and political and religious agendas. But the religion that ultimately underlies eugenics is Satanism. And one of the biggest forms of eugenics, aside from the neo-feminism agenda is abortion. More babies are being aborted than born. Institutions like Planned Parenthood are directly involved in eugenics, and many people involved in that who run that operation are absolutely eugenicists and think the population needs to be culled. And the dark occultists of this world are openly telling people that they want to cull them, like building monuments to eugenics, as the Georgia Guidestones were. They were recently destroyed, but I doubt it had anything to do with vandalism. I'd say it was more like a ritual act. Basically say we've accomplished this goal, or we're accomplishing it. But right on the stones it said maintain humanity under 500 million in what they think of as perpetual balance with nature. No, that's perpetual balance with the satanic mindset. That there's an elite class that consider themselves God on earth. That's what that is. That's an elimination of over 95% of the human population. And, this is what the COVID scam was part of. Another aspect of the eugenics agenda is the science of epigenetics. Epigenetics is a branch of science that takes human consciousness into consideration regarding the biological, psychological, and physiological expressions of human life. The word is derived from the Greek prefix epi, meaning beyond, further than, or past, and the Latin verb genere, meaning to make or to create. So epigenetics as a science is not bad, just to be clear, not in itself. It's just a form of knowledge. But understanding this field of research is critical to understanding what's going on. The science of epigenetics clearly demonstrates that human beings possess the ability to create adaptive changes to their gene expressions via changes in consciousness. Genes have been proven to be only a tendency for biological expression. Since consciousness precedes the genetic expression, if consciousness is changed, gene expression can be fundamentally altered. So can we actually alter our genes and genetic code through an alteration in our consciousness? Yes. This has been proven by this new science. The idea that we are slaves to our genes is an atheistic and satanic view, as is most allopathic medicine. It doesn't consider consciousness as a factor. Sure, there are some placebo trials, but that's as far as it ever goes, usually to discount consciousness in favor of some drug. And Time magazine actually did a front story piece on epigenetics in 2010. It says the new science of epigenetic reveals how the choices you make can change your genes and those of your kids. Epigenetics has shown that human beings are not controlled by genes like computer programs are controlled by code. This is a fallacy propagated by Darwinian scientism. When we work to change our consciousness and beliefs, our biological and psychological code can actually be rewritten and a different expression can be manifested. In other words, we are not our genetic code. We are the writers of our genetic code. If fully grasped by humanity, this fundamental understanding could help us to radically transform our world for the better. We are the authors of our genes, and they can be re-expressed if we re-express our consciousness. Epigenetic eugenics. So this is taking eugenics and population control into the epigenetic domain. It's eugenics being done through the manipulation of consciousness. And it's not only possible, it's being done. What if an occult ruling class long ago discovered how to influence the breeding process within entire populations for the purpose of making those populations easier for them to control? It is controlling human breeding by manipulating human consciousness to get the characteristics of the next generation to come out the way the ruling class wants those characteristics to come out. In other words, human farming, because that is what the control class consider themselves. They consider themselves farmers of human cattle. That's how they view us. This is population control through mind control. It's taking eugenics to the next level. It's going beyond physical eugenics that's done through violence and sterilization and taking it into the realm of consciousness. Epi-eugenics is the propagation of eugenics by way of social engineering or mind control and selective breeding by the very population which the eugenic strategy is targeted to destroy. So the people who the eugenic strategy is targeted to cull is actually doing this selective breeding process themselves, and they have been convinced that it is actually in their best interest to do it. And that's what's happening in our society. That is going on actively right now. You could call it mind-controlled downbreeding, or in other words, getting the herd to cull itself. That's what the social engineers of our world have actually accomplished. It is very important to understand that eugenics is not just about population reduction. It is ultimately about controlling which characteristics are expressed in human society by breeding certain desired characteristics into the gene pool and breeding undesired characteristics out of the gene pool. So it's not just about killing off a bunch of people. If you want a society to go in a certain direction and you want certain characteristics in the members of that society, you have to influence the breeding of those characteristics and the outbreeding of the characteristics you no longer want. And what this really is, as Mark Passio would call it, is dysgenics. Eugenics means breeding strength into a society, making it more strong, more cohesive, more dynamic, more diverse, and higher in consciousness in general. That's not what the social engineers are trying to do. They're eugenicists for themselves, but not for us. The social engineers of our society are creating people with horrible traits and characteristics through the manipulation of human biology and consciousness via chemicals in our food, water, and air, in addition to radionics fields that interfere with and change human physiology for the worse. And here's a huge tactic being used today as a way to destabilize a population. Another tactic of the epi-eugenics agenda is the deliberate androgenization of society, which slowly homogenizes and gradually erodes the distinctiveness of both genders. When gender and gender roles become skewed and blended, strong men and women sharing cohesive familial bonds become an endangered species. As a result of that breakdown of the familial dynamic between men and women, society becomes weakened at a fundamental level. Why is that? So understand that this is not an attack on any alternative sexualities or identities. This is explaining that the vast majority of human sexual interaction is between men and women. And when you androgynize that, or gradually erode the distinctiveness between the genders, and you're breaking down that familial bond that they can create together, you're weakening a society. And through that breakdown, you are ultimately going to create not only a divide between man and woman, but a divide between parents and children. And then that translates down to the next generation. But again, if someone wants to be androgynous, then, have at it. It's your body, as long as you're not being deceptive or manipulative. I personally look at androgyny in a spiritual way, as expressing the sacred masculine and sacred feminine in unity. And while that is ultimately an internal dynamic, I don't have a problem with expressing that externally. But that's not what this agenda is about. It isn't about personal choices. It's a deliberate attempt to eradicate the concept of men and women altogether. And this is why we had the sudden and rampant rise of transgenderism. Identifying as the opposite gender, or any imagined gender, is basically the result of a person giving into dysphoria and feelings rather than doing any deep internal psychological work to heal whatever trauma, imbalance, or social programming that led to those feelings. So it's saying, I'll just go with this and not examine the root causal factors of why I feel it, or face it and heal it. This sense of dysphoria often derives from unconscious, deep-seated self-loathing, which connects to some form of past trauma, which the person may not even recognize as traumatic. While there may be rare, anomalous developmental and chromosomal conditions like intersexism, which might create a sense of dysphoria, this goes beyond that. It's taking gender into the realm of fantasy, delusion, and even perversion in many cases. And the photo at the top there is of Jazz Jennings, who is considered America's first trans kid. And I feel sad for Jazz. You have to look into that story and how that kid has spiraled into depression, after their terrible sex reassignment surgery. Again, your mind and body are your property, and as an adult, you can do whatever you want with them, regardless of how unhealthy it may be. But this is being deliberately perpetuated and inculcated into society to cause harm, especially harm of children and teens. They push this onto the youth because they're the new people coming into the world. They're the target population, more than anyone else, when it comes to creating their new human. And sadly, many parents are pushing this onto their children and other people's children because they have fallen prey to this ideology themselves. And it's not exclusively about gender identity. That's a huge aspect of it, but it's ultimately about these things: to create confusion, self-deceit, and self-mutilation, to further reinforce obsessive identification with the body, as if that's all we are, to sexualize children, especially in their formative years, through incremental exposure to sexual themes and imagery, and to ease in the acceptance of child grooming and pedophilia, to androgynize humanity, complete eradication of male and female altogether, to sterilize newer generations through puberty blockers, in hormone therapy, and to further wage war against testosterone. But we do need to differentiate between the agenda and individual choice. If a grown adult wants to live their lives as the opposite sex, and they're not harming anyone or coercing anyone into their lifestyle, then that's their free will choice. This cannot be the norm, though. This isn't normal at all. Compare transgenderism to having depression. Depression is a form of dysphoria. Is it normal and healthy to think, well, I feel this depression, so I might as well give in to it and live my life this way? Of course not. No one would do that. You acknowledge and face that depression, and you work through it and try to heal it. You don't embrace it and celebrate it and wave flags of depression pride. So while a person has the right to live however they want to live, it's still a very low consciousness mindset. What we have to do is reach these people by speaking the truth about this agenda, but not out of hate. Hate doesn't heal anything. Here's another one: asexualism. Asexuals are people who do not experience sexual attraction to anyone else. Asexualism is characterized by a total disinterest in all sexual behavior, contrary to the claim that asexuality is not a physical and/or psychological disorder. That is precisely what it is. It is another example of what social engineering and low testosterone levels in men and women will create. It is not a naturally occurring thing in the human genome. It's from the total demolishing of testosterone in both genders, and by social engineering regarding attitudes about sexuality. Again, this is not an attack on people who call themselves asexual, or saying they should be discriminated against, but it still isn't normal. It's an example of what social engineering and low testosterone levels in men and women result in. And I should note that there's a difference between someone with a total lack of libido and interest in sex and someone who doesn't make sex an important factor in their life. A lot of people conflate these things. So what I've talked about here are just a handful of examples of this dysgenics agenda. Please look into this stuff yourself. Make your own presentations. This is our moral duty if we want to end this situation. So you need to know who is behind all of this. The first group you have to look into is the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which we talked about earlier. Look up the book by John Coleman. You need to read that book to understand this mind control think tank. Another group is the Club of Rome. They're directly connected with the Vatican and are absolutely responsible for population control agendas on this planet. It's 100% interconnected with religion. Because these front religious groups, the big three of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, are being run by the dark occult. They were created by dark occultists. And many other groups are part of this agenda, especially the Central Intelligence Agency, the Council on Foreign Relations as well, the think tank that directs political operations. The United Nations is also directly involved with eugenics. The Rockefeller Foundation is responsible for a lot of the pharmaceutical aspects of it. And there's the Bilderberg Group, which is setting international policy. Then there's the Fabian Socialists, represented by that shield logo with the wolf in sheep's clothing. Fabian Socialism is the form of politics that we have operating in the United States right now. It's incremental socialism, done through all the institutions. They aren't trying to conquer a nation by force, but through a cultural revolution, a slow march toward full communism. And that's what the Fabian Society is involved in, progressing cultural Marxist promulgation in the US. And this is all a communist agenda to weaken the main essence that strengthens the fabric of a society, which is the familial bond between man and woman. That is one of the main overarching methods of attack that communists have used in every country they've ever taken over, including the United States. And they're getting it done, especially through the school system. And by communists, it's really Satanist. They're the same ideology. Two masks, same face. To grasp what's really going on in the world, you have to deeply understand the mind of the psychopath. You can't really understand the level of evil that's going on unless you can put your mind into that mindset. The majority of my 30s was digging deeper into the study of psychology, looking at the mindsets of sociopaths, narcissists, and psychopaths, even living with a few. And if you don't understand that mindset, it's hard to even envision true evil. That's why most people can't see what's going on. And one of the biggest aspects of occult knowledge is understanding the human psyche. And these controllers are adepts of human psychology. If you can't visualize that level of evil, you can't understand how it's operating. It's hard for most to even grasp that this is being done because they can't even conceive of the mindset of the people who are doing it. It's almost too fantastical for the mind to accept as possible. Now, you don't want to be the psychopath, but you must understand that mindset to understand what we're up against and know how to fight it. Again, organized religion is part of it. Every so-called cultural religion out there, behind the scenes, is actively involved in the dysgenics agenda. I know that's hard to hear, but it's true. They're putting out these absurd views of human sexuality that are all about repression of the natural sexual dynamic between men and women, and that's a deliberate part of the agenda. You may think that all these religions are separate. They're not. They're all working behind the scenes on the same accord. It's just like politics, except it's like a three-party system. It's all the same people behind the scenes, directed by the dark occult and the eugenics agenda. These are just fronts for those groups. You have to understand that. So many people are attached to their religion and think that their religion is right and all the other religions are wrong. They're all invented to divide humanity. They're all invented to give people a rigid belief system so that they don't understand what's really being done. They all have a seed of truth within them, or most people wouldn't buy into them. So at the esoteric core, there's absolutely a seed of truth. But all the other trappings and rituals and so on is just there to throw you off the path of truth, to put you into a box and say, you shouldn't consider anything outside of this box. But here's the real religion that lies behind all of them. It's all invented by the same people, and it's been run by these people for tens of thousands of years. Not the exact same people, of course, but their bloodlines. These people come and go. One leaves and another comes in to take their place. And it's not all just men, or all just white people, or all just Jews, or all just Freemasons. It's an eclectic, worldwide variety of human beings from every walk of life. It's a dark occult agenda in a worldwide network. And you've probably met some of them. They're doctors, lawyers, school teachers, politicians, media pundits, you name it. And this religion is ancient. These people have been breeding on the earth for a long time, and they've been performing these operations for a long time. I'm not trying to make them sound all powerful and that we can't stop them, but we need to understand who's really running this show if we're going to stop them. Like I said at the start of the video, contrary to neo-feminist propaganda, we do not live in a patriarchy, nor do we live in a matriarchy. We do, however, live in an occultocracy, a society that is ruled covertly by a hidden priest class of dark occultists who use their advanced knowledge of the human psyche to mind control the overwhelming majority of the ignorant human population. The occultocracy comprises a small subset of humanity who believe that they are super worthy and that they are on their way to becoming gods on earth. Out of control ego and selfishness is the essence of their satanic religion. They have inculcated us with their own ego-driven belief system, which has replaced our traditional moral values and has become pervasively entrenched in our culture. So the problem isn't that there's a subset of Satanists running the world. The problem is they've given the bulk of humanity their psychopathic mindset. That's the problem. And until we break the bonds of that psychopathic, conscienceless, egoic mindset, you can't expect freedom. You can't expect positive change. Don't expect anything but slavery and death. That's what this cult is about, and that's what they'll continue to give us until we wise up. I'll close this out with a quote from George Orwell's book, 1984. You begin to see then what kind of world we are creating. It is the exact opposite of the stupid, hedonistic utopias that the old reformers imagined. A world of fear and treachery, of torment, a world of trampling and being trampled upon, a world which will grow not less but more merciless as it refines itself. Progress in our world will be progress towards more pain. The old civilizations claimed that they were founded upon hatred. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. Everything else we shall destroy. Everything. Already, we are breaking down the habits of thought which have survived from before the revolution. We have cut the links between child and parent, and between man, and between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. But in the future, there will be no wives and no friends. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth, as one takes eggs from a hen. The sex instinct will be eradicated. Procreation will be an annual formality, like the renewal of a ration card. We shall abolish the orgasm. Our neurologists are at work upon it now. There will be no loyalty except loyalty towards the party. There will be no love except the love of Big Brother. We've gone over many of the causal factors, mindsets, and problems of our current condition in the past couple of videos. It's time to look at the solutions now. We were given the ultimate solution a long time ago in the form of a story. Many stories, actually. Just like through story, we were told what the real original sin was, the mindset that destroys freedom. In the next video, we're going to look at that original solution. Until then, take a breather. See you next time.